In this video, I'll show you how to create the footer for the home page and how to insert the footer menu, which is a plain text menu, and a different kind of menu with the social icons, which are images. So let me get started by looking at the footer here and trying to break down its properties. Just like my header, my footer is full width, and within the full width footer, my content is contained inside a container so that it lines up with my section container and my header container. And also my footer sits clearly below my middle section. So let me go and look at my page so far in Dreamweaver where I have the header and the middle section. Now right now, if you'll see, I do have a footer in my page, and the footer content is getting squeezed to the right here, sitting in this little space next to my thumbnail columns. And if you look at the blue box defining the footer, it actually starts all the way up here with the content. Here we didn't do anything wrong, it's just that we have not gone ahead and styled the footer, and that's why it's behaving this way. So I'm going to add some basic styles for my footer so that I can get it to sit below my thumbnails, clear from all of this. So I click inside footer here in my code, and in my CSS designer, again I cannot see the plus sign for selectors, and if this happens to you, the solution is just go up to sources and make sure you click on the name of your style sheet, your CSS file that you have created. Now the plus button is available, and I'm going to click plus, and Dreamweaver creates a selector that says body footer. I can remove the word body because just the word footer by itself is clear. There is only one footer on the page. As for the properties, I'm going to add a width of 100%. I need to add a height and a background color. So I'm going to go back to Photoshop, find the background color, and copy it. And as for my footer height, I can measure the height in Photoshop. So I have right now about 200 pixels. So let's try that. So my height is 200 pixels. If I just type 200 and hit enter, the default unit that Dreamweaver assumes is pixels. Now you see this increased the height of my footer, but it's still kind of hanging to the right here, not sitting in its proper place, and definitely doesn't look like it has a 100% width. So the main property that I need to set is, because all of this content, my thumbnail columns were floated, I need to tell this footer to clear all of those floats so that it can sit independently below all these columns. That is the clear property here in CSS, and I'm going to set clear. You can have a choice of left, right, or both. Clear left will clear all elements that had float left. Clear right will sit clear of all elements that will float right. In this case, I'm going to choose both. Now you notice the moment I click both, my footer now sits below my columns. And now I'll set the background color. And hit enter. So here's my footer. It has the right color, it has 100% width and now 200 pixel height, and now it sits clear of my columns. Let me preview the page as it is. I'm going to save all and preview in Safari. Okay. So here's my footer. It looks pretty good for a start, but I would like to add some more spacing so that there's a little more breathing room between the tallest column and the footer. I can do this simply by adding a top margin to the footer itself. So in my CSS properties, I'm going to try something like a 50 pixel margin and see how that works. Now you see it adds a margin, but it doesn't push the footer down. The reason is all of these columns are floated, and the float property makes them exist in different spaces, as it were. Just like before we set the clear for the footer actually started up here and it was overlapping with the columns in a way. So float gets in the way of a regular layout where things just stack one below the other, and it can cause things to overlap, which is what's happening here. Even though I added the 50 pixel margin, the margin is overlapping with my thumbnail columns. And if I preview this page now, you'll see that it did not add any space, even though I added 50 pixels of margin. The reason for this is that our section, as you can see, doesn't have much height. Earlier I had added a top padding of 100 pixels to the section, which created this space. But if you look at the section itself, it has no height specified. So it pretty much has a height of 0 because all of these columns are actually floating. So our section actually ends right here. If we want to push the footer down, we will have to increase the height of our section, because even our columns do not have a height specified. So they think that they have a height of 0, even though in reality they stretch out to accommodate all these thumbnails. In terms of numbers, the browser still doesn't have a number for the height of the column. So if we want more space here, we will have to increase the height of our section. So I'm going to go up to section and give it a height of, let's just try something, 400 pixels. That only brings it down to here. So let's try 500. Okay, we need more. There you go. With 700 pixels, I now get this much height. And then I have the 50 pixels of top margin for the footer, which I don't really need. If I'm gonna increase my section height, I don't need to add another margin for the footer. So I'll go up to the footer and remove the top margin, and then I'll adjust the height of my section to about 650, and that's good. So my section has a height of 650, but the footer does not have any margin above it. That 650 pixels is enough to give me some space after the tallest column before my footer begins. So let me save and preview. Good. So now I have some breathing room between my images and my footer. And I did this by increasing the height of the section to about 650 pixels. Now I'm going to go ahead and insert the container inside my footer and add my menus. So inside my footer, I'm going to remove this placeholder text. Make sure my cursor is in the right place. It's after the opening footer tag, but before the closing footer tag. And then I go up to Insert Div. At insertion point is good. And then I choose my class container. Now here I have a div of class container now. And within that, there's some placeholder text. I'm going to remove this placeholder text and then add two divs. One to hold my footer menu and one to hold my social icons and the copyright message. So I'll remove the placeholder text, insert a div. Now because the ID doesn't really apply here because of there's a bug at this time in Dreamweaver 2017 where if I type the ID, it won't take in the tag. So I'll just add a div without ID. Here's my new div. And inside that div, I will go in and add an ID of footer menu. I can remove this text here. So after I type the first word, I see that it appears here. I'm going to finish the rest of the words in here. So I can just hit enter. So there are a few things I need to fix here. First, I want my text to show up in white. I want it to show up in my chosen font of Lato. And I don't want so much spacing between the paragraphs. All of this can be done very easily using the CSS styles. First, since all my footer text will be white, it's easiest to add this property in the footer itself. So I go up to the footer selector, go to text properties, and set the color to white. Second, also in the footer, I can change my font family to Lato. Now all of these paragraphs within the footer have too much spacing, so I'm going to change that by adding a new selector for paragraphs inside footer. So I have my cursor inside the P tag or the paragraph tag here, and I go in and add a new selector. The selector says .container #footer menu P. I actually want this to apply to all paragraphs inside the footer, not just inside the footer menu. So a simple way to write this selector would be footer space P. This means all paragraphs inside the footer. By default, the browser will add a margin to all my paragraphs. So if I want to get rid of that, I can just add this footer P and then go up to my layout properties and set my bottom margin to 0 pixels and also my top margin. As soon as I do this, you will see my paragraphs come closer together. If I want just a little more space, maybe I'll increase the top margin to 2 pixels, or maybe about 4 is good. Okay, that's a good amount of spacing between my links. Let me preview this. That looks pretty good, but I want some space above my menu. So I can do this by adding some top padding inside footer itself. So again, in my footer, I go up to padding and I add a top padding of 40 pixels. This adds some space above my footer menu. Now in my footer menu, each of these words will be linked to a page. Right now, since I don't have the other pages ready, I'm going to insert some dummy links. So I select the word drawing, open the properties panel, and add a hash, hit enter, and it becomes a link. I'll do the same for animation, photography, blog, and about and contact. As soon as I do that, I get the default style of links, which is blue text and underline. So I do want to change this. I'm going to click inside any of these links and add a selector so that I can style it. This is just like I did for the header. So here's my selector, #footer menu PA. All links inside paragraphs inside my footer menu. So for all these links, I want the text color to be white and the text decoration to be none. But I do want the underline to appear when we hover over these links. So I will add a new selector, which will be almost identical to this, except it'll have the colon hover. And in this hover selector, I will add an underline. Let's see how this looks. So here I have my footer menu with no underlines, and it's in white now. And if I hover over the links, they get underlined. So the styles worked. I did add 40 pixels of padding here, so if I want, I can remove 40 pixels from the overall height of my footer. So I go up to footer, the layout properties, and then I can change my height to 160 to make up for the 40 pixels of padding. Let's save and preview. Okay, so now my footer is back to 200 pixels of height total. Next, I'll add the right side menu with the social icons, and then I'll link them. So my footer menu is on the left of my footer because when you create any div, by default, if you don't specify any other alignment, by default it will start on the left. But because I'm going to add another div that's going to sit on the right side, and I want these two to show up side by side in the same row, I have to use the float property to get my footer menu and my social div to show up side by side. So I'm going to take my footer menu itself. I'll add a selector for it. Again, I don't need the word container. And my footer menu, I need to give it a width so that I can float it to the left. Right now, if you see, it's full width. I don't need that much. So a width of about 200 pixels should be sufficient. As you can see, it's more than enough. And then I will set the float left. Now it doesn't look like it changed anything, but if I had added my social icon here, without the float, my social icons would be sitting at the bottom. With the float, now they can sit side by side. So now I'm ready to add my social div. Inside my footer, within the container, after the footer menu ends, which is here, I'll add a new line and insert a new div. Add insertion point, and then I'll just click OK, and I'll give it an ID of social. Okay, so now you notice this div is sitting here. Why is it sitting here? Let's take a look. Because my footer menu has this much width. So my new div is sitting just to the right of it. I want it to be all the way on the right of the container. So I will add a selector for the social div. Once again, I can remove the dot container since I'll have only one div of name social. I'll give it a width. Right now I can just say 200 again. And I'll tell it to float to the right. Now once I give it the width and float, here's what happens. Of course, it looks like it's going off of my footer, but that's just because of the available screen space I have here. So I should save all and preview to show you what it would look like. And there you go. I have my footer menu on the left and my new social div on the right. Inside this div, I'm going to insert some images and then link them to my social media pages. So I'll take out the text that says content for new div tag goes here. And I'll add some images. So these images show up side by side, but they're stuck together I would like to have some space between them. So once again, with any image selected, I can choose my style.css, add a selector, hash social image, and then I can give it some left or right margins. So I added a right margin of about 5 pixels, and that's what this did. One thing I would like to do for my social div is I'd like to right align all the content. So all the content lines up with this invisible right edge of the container. Let me show you. So this is the edge of my container, my section container. So I know my footer container will also be there. I want all my social menu content to be right aligned, so it's nicely aligned with that right edge. It's very easy to do that. I go to the social menu selector, go up to the text properties. Now, even though these are images, they follow the same rules as text alignment. So I'm going to say right align everything. Let's preview this. So now all my content is right aligned. So you can see it's nicely lined up with the right edge of my thumbnails. I'm going to increase the margin between these photos. And instead of right margin, I'm going to use left margin. So my rightmost icon can be perfectly aligned with this. So I'll go back to social image, remove the right margin, and add a left margin of about 10 pixels. And that's better. The last thing I need to add here is the copyright message. So to do that, inside the social div, I'm going to insert a paragraph, and inside that paragraph, I will add my copyright message. So I go position my cursor after the last image, but before the close of the div, and I go insert paragraph, and inside this paragraph, I'll insert my copyright message. Now, if you're typing on a Mac, it's easy to type the copyright symbol. You hit Alt-G or Option-G. That inserts the copyright symbol. So let me save all and preview. And there it is. So I have 4 images and then a paragraph with my copyright message. So this completes my footer setup. I do need to link these images, but that's easy to do, and you already know how to link images, so I will not include it in this tutorial. Same thing for the links on the left side. I can go ahead and link my blog now because my blog is ready. It's an external link, but you already know how to do that. But in general, my footer is complete.